wholeness, like a circle, encapsulates this feeling of togetherness, of coherence, of oneness. When we feel this deeper sense of connectedness to all the parts of ourself, that we're no longer pushing away anything or resisting the flows of energy that are for our highest good, that we find space for everything in our lives as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to gain wisdom and insight, and to see how these seemingly disconnected things may actually all have a deeper meaning when they are put together. And this is what wholeness or psychological integration is about, what psychological maturity, or more the process of moving from psychological infancy to maturity is about, and then even moving beyond that concept of the psyche altogether into a space that is beyond the mind itself, or at least beyond the thinking mind and the self-referential ego. And although it first takes that process of integrating the ego and all of its elements and facets and the drives and the feelings and the order and the chaos and the wildness and the emotions and everything that it is to be a human, and to bring that into the forefront of one's experience in little doses at a time, perhaps at first, and then more and more so, that reckoning with what it is to be in the human experience and why we're here. And the beauty of it, if we were to say, is nothing that you could see or touch or taste, but perhaps you can feel inside your heart that this expansion of love and positivity and goodwill for humanity, generosity, and the overflowing of oneself without compulsion, just feeling that that is what is the natural experience, that's a result of some deep inner process. And that overflowing it's boundless, like the sun's light. It keeps shining through all darkness. And that, like the light of another sun or another star, doesn't diminish the light of any other star. So that everyone coming into this place of the light of their own being, it is what leads to the brightness of the whole world, or perhaps what we would see on a starry night sky. That while there may still be darkness, that these bright shining lights punctuate existence in a way that provides meaning in the same way that stars provide light in the sky. And when those stars are close enough, like the sun, then it provides warmth and reassurance and a deeper understanding of the cycles of life and our connection to what we're meant to do here, or what we're meant to understand or realize. And there's a psychologist, Dr. Carl Jung, who speaks about this quite a lot. He's known as the father of modern psychology. He was a student of Freud and eventually formed his own way of sharing about the psyche, like the collective consciousness and the archetypes of human inner life and how that is reflected in mythology and then in the modern world through the way that we form identity or persona and connect to each other as a reflection of our own understanding of ourselves, and the notion of the self as being twofold, or at least in the way of there being a small self of to know oneself and to know all the aspects of who you are, which may eventually be a reality, and also to know the bigger self, which is where we all are connected at some deep level, that the small self, or the totality of one's ego, then is only a small reflection of the bigger self, or the collective consciousness, or even the mind of the whole universe. And that somehow through billions of years, or however this universe has come into being, that all of the elements that are within us were forged at the center of stars going supernova, and then over time eventually somehow became life on Earth after planets were formed and the sun was formed and all the galaxies, etc. That we, at some point, there was life which became DNA, and then this DNA at some point, or maybe the whole time, was conscious, or that at least it gave us the experience of somehow now, after all this time, we are conscious, or at least we fancy ourselves to be. And that state of consciousness we feel to be unique to humanity, and yet we can observe in animals and even forces of nature that there's this great dynamic flow that is perhaps even beyond rational, certainly beyond rational understanding, and that somehow we're connected to all of that. And so then the question of where is the boundary of you? Are you in a skin suit a you? Is that what makes you a you? Is you being in your skin suit? Or are you a brain receiving information and projecting the understanding that this is reality for you, and that your inner experience is what is you? That the skin suit doesn't matter, but your inner experience of who you are matters or has meaning. And as that reality unfolds, then what is the difference between you and I, or how are we connected? And what is the concept of I, the rational I, the thinking processes responsible for us going about the world with an identity and performing in roles where we have a specific set of responsibilities as a person, and that process of being in the world somehow shapes our understanding or our perception or our perspective on who or what we are and why we're here. And when we release from those things, then what is left, and when we practice any sort of contemplative or spiritual practice, or simply just sit by a pond and look at the water and the ripples, when we stare at the clouds, or when we see a flower, what is the deeper dimension that we're connecting to when we're looking at or experiencing anything outside of ourselves? And what is the relation to anything outside of ourselves, or so we say, outside of ourselves, in relation to ourself? And this is sort of like the limitations of language, because there's many ways of framing something so that with language our perception is formed. And in many ways we can see how language can be a tool for expanding our awareness or contracting it. And so in connecting to our bigger world, one way of feeling about psychological integration, or this idea of becoming whole, that the world is you, that there's nothing quote unquote outside of you, that anything you experience in the world is happening in you. And somehow we experience that as something being like the world outside and then the world inside. And this is a valuable and helpful distinction to make, because we require these kinds of boundaries for functioning in the world. And at the same time, those boundaries may in fact be only filters that we're allowing ourselves to have so that we can process reality in a linear fashion in daily life. And that those experiences of feeling connected to the whole world, or to the whole planet, or even to the stars in the sky, the entire cosmos, everything that we can and cannot see, that's a bigger kind of integration. That there's the integration of all our past experiences, or how we relate to ourselves and other people, so that we can be healthy, functioning people in the world. And that process of healing these deeper aspects of our psyche is tied to most mental disorders, like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, autism, all of these things that are processes of integration. And this is what another neurobiologist Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, who's a professor at UCLA in the medical school, and he shares about how skin cells form early on in the development of an embryo, and then those cells, skin cells, eventually end up becoming the nervous system, that they turn in on themselves and create the neurons that form our nervous system. So when we relate to the inside world and the outside world, and we feel using the nervous system, that nervous system is somehow connected to that layer of skin, which is that mediating boundary between the inner and outer world. And as we develop healthy boundaries and connect more to who we are as an individual, that the process of becoming an individual still matters, that just because oneness or these deeper cosmic ideas of interconnectedness are here, are present, that actually adds to the importance of what it is to be an individual rather than taking away from it. And it puts an even greater understanding on why psychological integration, or why being connected with all the parts of our brain or all the parts of our psyche and coming into wholeness matters. Because when we are this individualized point of realization, we become like a star, we become like a candle that can light other candles. And when there's disconnect, whether through screens or through any kind of cultural programming or drugs or whatever the thing is that's keeping us from recognizing the inherent connectedness that we share with not only all of humanity but all of life, that when we understand or connect more deeply to that space within ourselves, we can more deeply connect to it in others. And this immediately gives us the ability to be of great service to everyone. And it's up to each individual to recognize or receive to their ability to receive. And those who are ready to receive will receive. That anyone who is suffering deeply can come to a new level of resonance with another person when they are present with them and when they are here in the moment together. And that as an individual showing empathy for another, this is one of the highest, if not the highest, art that we can share, that we can hold within ourselves, of just being able to resonate and be present with another person without taking on their suffering, and still being able to sit with it and to be a light in that moment, and to relieve some of that suffering for another person in many ways requires that we've relieved some suffering within ourself, and the greater suffering that we've relieved within ourself, the more potential we have to relieve it in others. And it's also a two-way street, that if we are focused on being of service and being that healing or force of wholeness in the world, then we begin to experience that in ourselves. So it's not about waiting for some sense of inner wholeness to go about doing the work that you can do. It's more about just stepping into the flow of it and being ready for that process to unfold within you. Like they say that doctors often will pick patients that represent some unhealed part of themselves, and that they also will have a certain level of intuition about which patients to pick, knowing what the healer is ready to heal within themselves. And so this process of whether you decide to label yourself as a healer or anything like that, everyone's a healer. That there's, in order to, when you get a cut and then you put a Band-Aid on it, even something as simple as that, where the body naturally heals itself, that healing energy is just energy, that the ability to move energy or to allow energy to flow to others, perhaps, or to improve that flow of energy within others to a greater degree, perhaps would define one as a healer. And yet we all have that ability already. It's what the medical science would call innate intelligence, that when a doctor gives someone, whether it's just a lifestyle recommendation or a medication or surgery or whatever it is, that any of those things is simply going to be a tool or a mechanism that gives someone an opportunity to turn on that healing energy or that flow of energy within themselves, that energy can be used for anything, and that when it's directed inward, it's used for healing, and when it's directed perhaps inward and then upward into the brain through any kind of internal process. And this is what the East is so skilled at, with practices like meditation and qigong and yoga and all the breathing exercises and the way of life of living in the flow with nature and living peacefully and in harmony with nature, that there's a certain connection when we do sit quietly, sitting still, and start to calm the thoughts, not just the body, that when we slow the breath, the thoughts slow down, and as we still the body, the mind slows down, that it's really all the same thing. It's only through language that we have these different means of discerning what we're talking about, and yet recognizing that even when we say body and mind, that it's all the same system, and there's layers to it, that perhaps body is the outer layer and mind is one way of saying that there's an inner layer. Perhaps there's many inner layers. There's feelings, like the energy of the heart, and then there's thoughts, and those are both inner layers. But where do we define that as mind? We can call it all mind. You decide. There's many systems. I'm just choosing simple terms to describe right now what's going on. And so we have feelings. We feel sensations on the skin or in the muscles. And that's the afferent and efferent nerves in the somatic nervous system. And those nerves then run directly into the spine, which is the central nervous system. And then, of course, the spine, those nerves run into the brain, which is feeding back and forth. And, of course, the brain is still the central nervous system. And somehow in that process, we get all these feelings and sensations and awarenesses, and we're connected to this sense of identity and this concept of the world, and somehow we form a coherent understanding of the world, or at least a model of reality that we're capable of working with. And so as we feel into these spaces within ourselves, that there's a place for everything. There's a way to accept what you're feeling. There's a way to feel grateful for these experiences. There's whether, even whether we label them as positive or negative, that, a lot of the time people will say that the most challenging experiences that they've gone through end up being some of the greatest blessings in their life later on, because they prepare them for experiencing more joy. That there's somehow this relationship between suffering and love, or between sadness and joy. That there was a short poem I just read that was something simple as: the fire that forged the cup which you drink from, that the wine or the nectar of your life that you drink from, that cup had to be forged in fire. And these experiences that we go through, when they are more challenging, or when we do face resistance, even just within ourselves, there may not be anything actually outside of ourselves, but it's just we're putting up our own resistances, and that process of letting go of that unnecessary suffering can liberate a massive amount of energy in us that allows us to actually start to work towards the things that we do want to accomplish. And it, in the process, requires a certain level of forgiveness and letting go. That those two feel like they go together. That acceptance and forgiveness, gratitude and letting go are all connected. That when we feel like we are holding on to something, usually there's a process of forgiveness to happen. And whether, again, that's inside of us or outside of us. And that may take many days or many months or years even of forgiving and forgiving and forgiving. And what forgiving is allowing that energy to return back to you, back to your source of power, back to that source of love within you. That when there is something that we're holding on to, it's almost like a pool of energy that is just like swirling, and yet it's staying in one place. And when we move it, when we allow it to move, when we let go, when we accept the past or even the present, then we feel a greater sense of agency or ability to change. And that next step of gratitude lets us move towards the things that we actually want or are meant to experience in the highest sense of that word. That the best in life is here waiting for you, that it's not dependent on external circumstances, that the external circumstances arrive when you move from those spaces of holding on to letting go, or when there is the forgiveness and the opportunity to release and to experience life in a new way, where we're not so caught up in the complications or complexities that something as simple as, I woke up today, I get to experience another day of life where I can choose what it is that I'm here to do, or how it is that I'm here to show up. And so much of it is that inner experience rather than the external circumstance, that showing up with a smile can change someone else's day, and then by changing someone else's day, you end up changing your day. Something as simple as being present and empathizing with another person when they are suffering, when you can give someone even the smallest bit of reassurance, like giving someone a flower, or pointing out that life is short and that we're all here together, that if you are going through something, then odds are there's someone really close to you that may also be going through the same thing, or we never know what people are going through. And so experiencing that deeper level of vulnerability or empathy, or even just saying yes to experiencing that insight that comes from resonating with your own inner suffering or process, and letting go of the attachment to that as somehow defining you, and stepping into that space of experiencing love as a transformative power. And that even Jimi Hendrix said, when the world knows, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world shall know peace. And that even if it feels like the odds are stacked against you, or that there's so much in the world to feel all kinds of ways about, that every day is an opportunity to work for, fight for, to live in a space where you are being the change, where you are that force in the world, and that the light of a single candle, even in a dark room, lights up the entire room, and that every little action matters, that your efforts make a difference, and that in connecting and raising the consciousness of others makes a difference, even when it's hard to tell exactly what's happening. And you can tell in your own way by connecting to that feeling of joy, or that feeling of happiness within you. And the more joy that you feel, the more likely it is that you are connecting to that. And that feeling of compassion with joy, it's a way to see the world without getting so caught up in it, that being able to be sensitive and present for another person is one of the greatest skills that we have, and that's more or less the same thing as empathy, that presence is our power, and presence requires peace. And connecting to the breath as a way to pass on that information, that eventually we go into the space of silence where there's no more that needs to be said, and we're simply just being. And that when we're simply just being, when we are in that experience sharing it with another, that then something happens. There's the shared experience of just being, and that this search for all of these things in the world and in life often end up leading to this experience of something leading you to a deeper state within yourself where you feel complete. And that sense of completion, while it may feel connected to the outside world in terms of goals or things that we want to do, and that somehow all of that, it's important, and it also fades into the background, similarly to waking up from a dream. When we do come into ourselves in the sense of feeling comfortable in your skin, or feeling like you are where you need to be, and that you're who you need to be, and being happy with that it's not a smooth or even gentle ride. And at the same time, the more that we bring the awareness of peace and calmness and tranquility into the experience, the more challenging experiences or feelings are transformed. And that's the work. That is a practice of bringing energy and awareness and power with poise, with calmness, with presence into all experiences. And even if those experiences are just memories, that we can reframe our experience in the present by being present. There's many great sages who've said something along these lines. This is from Yogananda, that to take care of the present and the future will take care of itself. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. May your day be brilliant and bring a smile to someone's face. Thank you.